You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Hello friends, welcome to episode 17 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level, I am Sarah.
And I am Rob. It's another exciting, I guess, week of podcasting. So,
doubly exciting this week, though.
Yeah, because we're going into world building.
Rob, what have we done?
I know, but we're stepping into it with, like, ginger toes, I guess you could say.
That's true. That's true.
So, we have no really exciting news. We do have a temporary engineer in, because unfortunately Kate's out sick, and we're worried about you, Kate.
No, we are. If you're listening,
hope you were doing
love you,
well.
Kate.
So this week
we have Jessica helping us out.
We do have Jessica, so we're very happy to have Jessica here with us.
Thanks. I'm happy to be doing your show.
Thank you, Jessica.
All right.
So, all right. Actually, I've worked with Jessica before. I had a friend show that I was on briefly, and showed up for an episode, and she was the engineer there, and you did a wonderful job. So it was one of the reasons why I decided that we should come here and do this, and showed it all Sarah. So you were one of the main reasons.
I feel special.
We had a happy little reunion out in the waiting area and everything. It was great.
It was great. So, how do you want to? I'm not going to say it because I might get us kicked off iTunes.
How do you want to slice? How do you want to slice this pie?
Or cut this bacon?
Yeah,
or whatever.
It was a sick pig, allegedly.
Allegedly.
Anyway, yeah, God. This is okay. So world building is big
because I know in the discussion, even just before the show, we were talking about different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, we had probably an hour long discussion just over dinner prior to the show here, just about a couple aspects of world building.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've watched so many different videos on YouTube. There's a lot of great people who out there talk about it and stuff like that. I mean, hours upon hours upon
and we've got
hours.
Unbelievable influences. Everything from, like, we were talking about digital games, like you talk about Silent Hill, like it's the second coming of Jesus in storytelling, which is beautiful to me. I love the passion that you bring off of it. And
specifically Silent Hill 2.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
You know, whereas, like, I'm pulling references from all kinds of stuff. Like, we talked about Portal even. And so, and it's funny, I'm sure some of the people who are listening are like, why are we talking about digital games that the story is weird and the setting is small? Again, when we're talking about world building, we want to talk about it in the aspect that a world is where stories exist. So when we're talking about building a world, we're not talking about a physical scale. We're not even talking about an immense population or an epic long history or any of that. A world is merely where your stories are told. So just keep that in mind, whether it be tragedy, whether it be comedy, whether it be anything. The world is where that setting's whole. It's the giant fishbowl or the tiny fishbowl, but it needs to be crafted enough to be able to handle those things.
I think probably the biggest thing you're looking for in crafting any sort of world, and again, we're using world in terms of just the scope of your story.
Right.
So, you know, whatever size fishbowl you're crafting here, the main thing you're looking for is consistency.
Yes.
Okay.
And consistency also includes logic. We'll get to that.
Consistency means logic, but I mean, if you're going to find one North Star, one guiding point on the big topic, no matter where you are in world building, consistency should be it. Okay. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how big your world is. Basically that all of your rules are consistent across the way. Okay, so like if in your world that you're crafting, you know, eating a flower, or a specific type of flower gives you magical powers, then it must always give you magical powers.
Right. If I go pick up a daisy, does it give you magical powers?
Right.
Or is it only one magical flower, fruit thing that gives you that?
Exactly.
Then it has to only be that thing.
Exactly. It doesn't matter why. I mean, it's a good idea to have a reason why.
Right.
But no, I mean, you don't ever really need to explain why that particular flower does.
No.
But it just needs to be an accepted fact in your world.
Yep.
That flower gives you magical powers.
And you need to know, once you know that it's magical powers, okay, what does it grant?
Exactly. Is it temporary? Is it permanent?
Yep.
Is it, you know, world altering, or is it just I can light a cigarette without a bic?
Exactly.
You know?
And You can always go back to the stories that don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Those moments when you've looked at something and been like, okay, why did that suddenly change?
Say it. Invoke its name. I want to hear Overwatch squirm from all the way here in the studio.
Metachlorians. I hate the word. I don't know why they did that. There was no good reason to say, oh, now we need to explain what the force is in some scientific methodology because we have a kid.
They're the powerhouse of the cell. Oh, wait, no, that's mitochondria.
Yeah, see, now you've already done it to yourself.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense then. It really didn't. And it didn't make sense for why it was there. Like, unobtainium. It had a great start point. Don't get me wrong, but then they just started stacking reasons why they were getting it that didn't make sense. So you looked at that story and you're like, okay, the rest of the story was fine, but why did you guys do this?
Yep.
So anytime you've seen that in a story, think about why it doesn't make sense to you. And it's probably because they added things to it, or its power changed, or something else, or like near the end of what was I just? Shazam. I was watching like what was terrible about Shazam, and right at the beginning, I was like, well, they called, the bad guy calls upon these, basically the four horsemen of the apocalypse, if you will, who come in at the end and they have these, like, they can't be hit because they turn into, like, gas and just float away. And yet, at the very end of the story, they're able to be punched in the face. Like, are they gas? Did they suddenly lose those powers? Like, how is it suddenly, like, easy to take them out?
Yep. Consistency.
Exactly. If it doesn't make sense to you, don't do it. Don't do it.
All right. So, now that we got our guiding rule, our
and
basics of logic, of things, making sure things make sense, making sure they fit together, and making sure that at the beginning of your story and at the end of your story, all of your world building elements do the same thing.
Right. Just keep that written down in your mind.
How do you do it?
Well, you can talk about what it isn't, and you can talk about what it is, but I think we need to talk more about trying to figure out the who, what, when, where, and why, and what that really means to creating it. Because you did a good job at dinner breaking that down.
Yeah.
And then I kind of layered something on top that blew your mind at the same time as made you be like, I don't think so. So I want to let you run with your who, what, when, or why analogy because I like it.
All right.
I like the way your mind was going with that.
We'll start there. All right. So a couple notes that I jotted down. Basically that in world building, you've got your 5 questions.
Yeah.
Your who, what, when, where, why. Everybody knows these questions. They're very basic. Your why is your story. Okay, so you don't need to answer that. Your stories will answer the why. You'll understand why you're in that particular part of the world and why those things are functioning in that world at a later point.
And to be understanding, the why isn't just taking the word why out of the equation. There's going to be whys all throughout this, but the overarching why.
Right. The big why.
Why the world? Because of these players.
All right. So world building, at least to me, in its barest, most basic form. And keep in mind, everything we're saying tonight is bare and basic because this is such a huge topic. Okay. Yeah. But world building 101. You're going to start with who, what, where, and when. All right. So let's break those down a little bit. Who? Who are the people in your world?
The things.
Okay.
The talk.
So at this point, we're looking at essentially your sociology, your anthropology. Okay. Your world is presumably populated. Okay. With who?
Yep.
Is this a fantasy world? If it is a fantasy world, do the people there, what's their technology level?
Are there factions?
Are we talking like Cro-Magnon? Are we talking, tribal and barbaric? Are we talking,
multi-races?
Are we talking like verging on steampunk?
Sure.
So how learned and, I suppose civilized, structured, technologically advanced are the people? Does it vary from place to place? Yep. Are there different peoples at different developmental levels in your world?
And to a micro setting for this same thing, maybe your world is a high school, and your whole story is going to occur in a high school. There are factions. Do you have your jocks? Do you have your geeks? Do you have your nerds?
Exactly.
How do they interact with each other? Are some of them rich? Are some of them poor? Is there an economy going through that school? Are there drugs? So who are those people? So again, your players are still the same. It's still that same mentality of factions, design, sociology. So keep that together in your head that we're not talking about, when we say world, we're not necessarily talking about a giant scale planet necessarily. It's whatever your world is.
And keeping in mind too that, a lot of the stuff I believe is rough sketches at first.
Totally.
I mean, you got an idea for a people. You don't need to define their entire economic system down to the last coin. Just say like, hey, these group of people over here, styled off of, say, maybe Central European descent, with these 1, 2, or 3 different, physical or dress characteristics, and they're at roughly this technology level, and they like a capitalist economy.
Yeah.
Okay, and move on.
Yeah.
And move the hell on.
And you may just say like this other people is a wiped out race. There are very few of them left, and they're nocturnal, and they have black eyes, and they're feral.
And
boom.
Yeah. And there's this other people over here who were wiped out at the same time. They're an offshoot, and they hang on to their religion very tightly because it's the last vestiges of their culture.
There you
Done.
go. Move on.
Move on. Because what will happen is as you sketch out the rest of your world, you'll start asking that last question. Why?
Just pause the why for now.
Right. And you'll start filling in a lot of those blanks as you move. All right.
Where?
This is your land. This is where your story presumably will take place.
This is the hill where everyone will die on.
Yes. So, again, if you're doing high school, what's the high school's name? How big is it? What's the class size?
Is it dirty?
Is it dirty? Is it upscale? Is it a private school, public school? Is it a specialized school? Is it like a trade school of some sort?
Do they live there?
Is it a Professor Xavier's school for, gifted students or
Exactly.
something? I mean, that's technically a school environment right there.
Yeah, you may start asking yourself a few why questions in there, but more along the lines of help define, like, do the students live there? Well, if they don't, then obviously you're also going to have to expand that out to maybe a community a little bit. Something just beyond the walls of the school, or maybe you set up a high wall in the school and the stories always take place between, 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. And that's when your game runs, and the game ends when the 3 p.m. bell finishes and the students go home.
Yep.
So again, define it well, but it has to be consistent. The story has to be that way. I mean, you can have seasons. That's a totally different thing, and you can say, that your school exists in a magical entity where it may snow in July because it needs to for the spring snow princess festival.
Or it's set in Australia.
Exactly. Because
believe me, it confuses the heck out of me when the one Australian friend I have on Facebook
says it
starts, oh my God, the temperatures have dropped so much and it's snowing. And I'm like, have you looked outside? Oh,
Australia.
You're my Aussie friend, right?
That's right. So just remember that you come back to these things. These are the same things that, animators go through when they're building a new TV show.
Yeah.
Or a writer goes. So you just have to be consistent, and you can make sense of it.
Sure.
Through your own methodology. But if the world is very small, you have a lot of control. The bigger the world, maybe the where starts having to have seasons, starts to have other pieces to it. So just keep that in mind as you're rolling through things.
And I would say keep 2 other things in mind. First off, that you only really need to define where your story is taking place.
Yes.
First and foremost, if you know that you are going to be telling a story on the Sword Coast of Faerun or something like that, then you don't need to draw the entire world.
Right.
You don't need to write that all down and get everything detailed. Just start with the village that your story is going to start in. Define that. Define the countryside around it, and maybe define a little bit about the country or nation or whatever, municipality that it takes place in, just so you understand what the laws are and who these people are beholden to on the greater scale. Okay.
Right. You may have other characters that come from other places, and at that time, you can worry about those definitions.
But don't be afraid to leave some places on the map blank. That's something Dungeon World teaches us.
Very much so.
Leave blank places on the map because you can fill that in. Sometimes your players will hand you some really great stuff.
Yep.
And you'll be able to incorporate some of that world building in for you, and at a minimum of work.
That's right. I mean, it sounds funny because it's not intuitive to leave a blank spot on the paper, but you're not. And your players will never know it's a blank spot. That's
Exactly.
the key. But that all comes out in the storytelling.
It's like Schrodinger's map.
Yeah.
I mean, dead honest. It's not defined until it needs to be.
Right.
And so it's not a blank spot or a filled in spot until your players interact with it.
And that kind of goes back to what Chris was saying, who's probably listening, and back a few shows when he was on with us, where he says, once they interact with it, write that shit down.
Oh, yeah.
And come up with it. But until that point, it's really not that important to deal with. Don't let it go at your head. So
now, the second thing I will bring up here, too, is don't be afraid to go a little crazy with this. If you really want to build a unique world,
do it.
Absolutely. If you want your skies to always be pink, if you want there to be floating islands or weird alien plants there or, whatever, like,
sure.
Absolutely.
I
Write
agree.
that stuff in. Like, cool biomes are like really defining in character. I would say you should probably just ask a few why questions if you are going to include something like floating islands, because I guarantee if you say that there's a floating island, your player's going to be like, all right, why does the island float?
Right.
You might want to have a quick answer for that.
Yeah.
But again, you can come up with any reason. It's your world.
Right. And you can make those reasons very deep or pretty darn shallow.
It's filled with a crystal that is lighter than air.
There you go.
And at a certain point, it offsets the density of the island, and you end up with that. All right. Good enough.
Yep.
All right. What?
So what kind of powers, what assets interact with your world? Now, your players obviously do, and they have things. But we're talking on a grander scale. We're talking about gods, supernatural forces, cosmology. Like, do you have a Mount Olympus and a bunch of gods literally sitting in a pantheon? Or do you have them sitting just outside of the visible range in some kind of an ethereal space where they're allowed to only poke in where there are holes that exist, or gateways?
Do they have their own whole realities floating around out there like little bubbles in space?
Yeah.
I mean,
do you have werewolves? Do you have, things that change? Do you have, eldritch horrors that come out at night, out of the shadows themselves?
Do you have magic? Do you have, and if you do have magic, what is it? Is it a gift from the gods? Is it a side effect of a drug?
Yeah.
Is
it figuring things out?
Sure.
Like, I did some logic and wrote some things down and a little bit of math and boom.
It's like physics.
Yeah.
Yep. I drop this apple, it will always fall. I move my hand like this and say these words, I will always get a fireball.
Exactly. Sometimes it's that simple. And again, you don't have to make it complex until it needs to be.
Right. And this is, I think, probably the biggest place where you start really getting into the logical consistency sort of rule. Okay. Because when you start inventing things to add in that are your fantastical elements, your what is your fantastical elements, really? Your gods, your supernaturals, your magics, your aliens, your whatevers.
Yeah.
This is really where you need to start thinking about, okay, if vampires do exist in my world, what actually are they?
Right.
Are they living dead? Are they someone who's just afflicted by a virus that makes them need to, bestially feed on blood only?
Right.
Are they perhaps some sort of eldritch creatures that have leaked in from between the worlds and just happen to be feral beasties with fangs that drink blood, so we call them vampires?
Are they actually cancerous creatures, and that's why their bodies are immortal, is because they just keep reproducing every cell in their body, but because of that they require a ridiculous amount of nutrition and energy, and it doesn't matter what form it comes in, but blood seems to be a really good form to come in.
Exactly. So, I mean, and that's just, I mean, skimming the top of what if vampires.
Right.
Okay. So the lesson to pull away here is when you do start introducing these fantastical things, especially in the what category,
right,
take the time to really ask yourself a couple of why questions. There are vampires. Okay. We've established there are.
Yep.
Why? Where do they come from? What do they do? These sort of things, okay? Because these are and the answers that you come up with have to be consistent through your story.
They were a CGI mishap.
If sunlight doesn't hurt them in chapter 1, sunlight can't hurt them in chapter 10.
Right.
if your gods are aloof and don't interact in chapter 1, and that's the way it's always been, don't have them suddenly sending avatars willy-nilly down to talk, personally with your party in chapter 5.
Unless there's dire consequences.
Or unless something has changed that rule.
Yeah, well, there was a really neat storytelling that I liked, and I'd never read the book, but I'm going to go in that, and that's The Hogfather. And that's part of the Terry Pratchett series, which is fantastic. And in that, Death is a character. Actually, Death walks around, and he's got a granddaughter, and she's amazing. But one of the things that's involved in that story is these accountants that basically are managing the universe. And they don't like the fact that there is free will, if you will, and creativity. And so they throughout this, without anyone's knowledge, are attempting to kill off the Hogfather. Because by killing off the Hogfather, they can start a domino effect effectively. But they can't do it themselves, so of course they do what everyone does. They go and hire an assassin. Because they can't directly interact. And that's made very specific. But you don't know why, necessarily, until the end of the story where they do something stupid and directly interact. At which point Death goes, now you're in my house. like up to this point, you were doing just fine, but now you've stepped into my world and I get to do something about it. And it was a neat world rule that was established. Like, other terrestrial creatures cannot fuck with things, but they can influence, they can request, but they can't be directly involved. But the moment they're directly involved, at that point, they've gone too far. They stepped one thing. Like, really, he was watching up to the point where, like, these creatures turned themselves into wolves, feral wolves, and were chasing down the Hogfather to kill it. And it's like, great, you're chasing it down. That's fantastic. Oh, look, he's going to get away. And now you're going to go and try and bite him. Okay. Right there. That's where you right. That's where you cross the line.
Now you have messed up.
And I liked that rule.
But it's a rule, and it's a consistent rule.
Exactly. And that's the key there. And it made sense. At the end of the story, I'm like, what's going on here? And then they came out right out and said it. It was like Death was like, oh no. You done screwed up.
Right.
You knew the rules, you knew what the screw up was gonna be. Now I get to murder you and take you with me. And I thought that was beautiful. I thought that was good world building and good story drawing.
Yep, absolutely.
So think about that when you're doing things. Oh, set some hard rules, set some ancient rules. Another one was the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series. Aslan gets literally murdered. But one of the old rules, which he helped write, was he sacrificed himself. So it's
Don't
kind
quote
of
to me the old magic, which I was there when it was written.
And she kind of forgot about that. So those kind of rules, as long as you've got stuff like that set in your book to the side and you know those rules, so that when it comes back around, your players are like, oh, crap, that's fantastic. And that's how you get those feelings out of it.
That's how you get those feelings.
Good old magic, if you will.
And the cool thing about having those sort of rules is that your players will start using them.
They'll figure them out.
Whether they know it or not. Like in 7th Sea, my character knows nothing of the Fae.
Nope.
However, she has a character in the party who does understand the Fae. And as a sorceress herself, she understands that magic is a thing. And so when she sees Enid interacting with her Fae, she believes and she leans in. She goes, oh, that's her magic. Okay, I see the kinship. It's not the same magic I'm using, but I'm paying attention because I want to know how that works. And then suddenly, when we come across some Fae creature that is speaking in riddles to us in the forest and essentially threatening us with having trespassed into its sacred woods, I have a spark of inspiration and I challenge it with a riddle in rhyme. And it smiles at me and says, oh, I see you know how to play the game.
Yep.
And we started that conversation over on a completely different foot.
Yes, it totally changed the whole makeup of that scene.
Because there were rules for how the Fae worked.
And as a storyteller, I had very simple rules written down that didn't even include that, but that is part of the rule set.
Yep.
Like for that, in fact, in that specific encounter, it was very simple. He was a Fae of the woods. His job was to protect the woods. And as long as the party didn't damage the woods or take anything from it, meaning if the trees had dropped wood, that's fine. It's on the ground, no big deal. But if you chop down a tree, you chop down a tree, you take some sap from a tree, you steal, berries or fruit from bushes, you were his. That was it. Simple as that. He protects the woods. So anything beyond that was just Fey rules. And Fey rules are kind of gray in some areas, but the most thing is that there's a couple types of Fey, and he happened to be one of the types of Hob that love riddles. They will always talk with riddles. And if somebody else is willing to play the game, they will play a game of riddles. They'll play it all night long. They'll play it until you go crazy. So it was a neat thing that you had picked up from her and then started playing with, and it worked out to your advantage.
Yep.
So
all because of consistent rules.
There you go.
Yep. Okay, so the last thing we've got is when.
Yes.
Now, when is a little bit tricky.
I agree. I don't like when you said when, I'm like, how important is this?
You're making the face right now. You're making the oh God, is this really a thing face?
Yeah. But it means less about when everything is happening and more about like when are we right? When are we in the world?
Right.
And that could be like, for instance, 7th Sea has a good when, because when you look at the book, it literally tells you at what point in history this book is referring to.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that you have to play that year. You could play a little earlier. You could play a little later. You know what's going on historically, so you could kind of push the timeline either direction.
Yeah, specifically like Adventure Tales of the AI Society. We talk about this game pretty often, and that takes place in 1928 or thereabouts.
Yes.
But at least that era of history. And they kind of give you a range on it, but there's certain technology that you're going to expect. There's certain characterizations you're going to expect. There's certain world events that are taking place during that time. So that's, it's a good starting place. Now, if you're crafting your own world, though, you start getting into a little bit of a mire. And I think this is why Rob is giving me stinky cat face right now, because
I don't think it's stinky cat face so much as it's, I think knowing history is important. Yeah. It might be recent history that's really important in specific moments.
Yeah.
But
and I think that's really where it gets to, because much like a lot of world building aspects, there's a tendency to think, oh God, I've got to write the entire world. I've got to draw a map for the entire world. I have to define every city and every person and every economic system in every world. And when you get to when you get to history as an important part of the world, you think, oh God, I've got to make 2,000 years worth of timeline and socioeconomic development. You don't.
No Silmarillions.
You don't.
You don't need that.
We're going to give you the exact same advice that we gave you about everything else, and that is rough sketch of minus 50 years.
Yeah.
Something like that, okay? Just what were the major events that led to this place being in this state at the beginning of our story?
And you may need to write what I like to call the victor's history, so that it's what the players know. And you may need to add in some historical references because of player background. Like a player might say, I was a warrior in a great war, and you're like, okay, well, I really don't have any great wars that happened. But I could
have one. Yeah, there's this other city I was kind of toying with writing in that doesn't really get along with this other city. Maybe that's the Great War. Maybe that went on a little longer and a little more fervently than I had originally intended.
Right. Or they may ask you, hey, my character wants to be a fighter in a great war, or have this great victory, which kind of we did with the Tamriel storyline that we're doing right now with yours and Elder Scrolls, because not all of us are familiar with Elder Scrolls. Sure. It's as much of a crafted world for you, of yours, than it is something we know. And it was easy for you to then look to the existing world history and say, oh, this would fit in well right here.
Yeah, these guys over here are always fighting, and that happens to be the very race that you are. So
exactly.
What you fought in was not a major war; it was a border skirmish. But you're in a constant state of border skirmish.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you put in which always, when I see the word or I hear it, is hard, and that is prophecy.
Oh.
Writing prophecies into whens is story. We're getting into setting.
Yes.
So I always say, if you want to put a prophecy in, now you're developing for a story. You've moved beyond world building. You're starting to get into, how does this affect my players directly? I wouldn't write into the world about a sword of destiny necessarily, unless it was in the setting for those players.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you one minor exception to that rule.
Sure.
Okay, and that's something like Excalibur. Okay, that the entire nation knows that someday someone will come along, or no, I'm sorry, not Excalibur, the Sword and Stone.
Sword and Stone.
Sword and Stone. Know that someday somebody will come along and draw that sword from the stone, and that man will be king. Okay. Now that you might just be taking place in that world. That sword may never get drawn out of the stone. I mean, Chekhov's gun says otherwise, but it might just be a thing.
Right there.
But you're getting into a broader, like, sometimes prophecies are not laid down to like this character will do this thing.
No.
Sometimes it's a little broader.
But at the same time, if you're going to put a sword in a stone in a player's campaign and make it important, they're going to wonder when that sword is coming out of that stone.
The sword is in the stone in the first act. Someone should be king by the third act.
Thank you.
Yes.
Or the stone should be shattered and the sword should be missing by the third act, or whatever. It needs to be there. So again, I think you're breaking your own rules by doing that.
Right, but at what point then does your world become Chekhov's gun? Okay,
it's setting.
If you say that there's a volcano that sits, that overlooks the entire countryside,
sure.
Does Chekhov's gun say that volcano has to erupt by the third act?
Did you create a prophecy about what happens when the volcano erupts? Because you did with the sword.
Shut up.
You could say...
Okay, no, that's a good point.
You ready?
That's a good point.
You could say that after the Third Great War, the war that conquered everyone, the winner of that war was Arthur, and his final act was mounting his sword into a stone that no one has been able to draw from. Boom. Done.
Okay.
I'm not creating prophecy. I'm saying this is the last time this sword will be used.
Fair enough.
Now, granted, that opens the door a little bit for a Chekhov's gun moment, but really what I'm doing is I'm setting what happened in the world and what ended it.
Oh, what you're doing is you're creating history for that sword.
Correct.
You're creating a cool landmark, and you're creating a story for that landmark to give that landmark history.
Exactly.
Which feeds back into our when.
Correct. Now, Sarah put this all out, and she did a beautiful job, and I thought it was a really good way of explaining it. I thought it was a great framing. But one of the things that kept coming back to me, and this came to another conversation with someone else, was that when does world building become setting for story? Like, when do you accidentally step down? When have you gotten too close?
Yeah, because you've said that a couple times.
Yeah.
Like that's setting. So let's talk about that a little.
So for me, I think I think world building is, you outlined it beautifully. I think the steps that you put in are fantastic. And I would definitely I would follow that as kind of a soft guide for most of my world build. But I think when you get to the point where you're starting to talk about what your players will be interacting with, when you're getting too micro, when you're doing something that defines, I would say, like, maybe even the framework upon which the players are in. For instance, I might say, hey, this is a kingdom, and it's ruled by this king, this family, and this is the king, and there are, it's a farming land, and it provides for this other area over here, and there's a mining group here, and they mine this particular material, and that's what this kingdom is known for, is this material that makes like these special swords and armors, and they sell it to another kingdom, and they're getting invaded because somebody wants that shit, right? Boom, world build. But when I start talking about, Ithreli, who is the head of the mining camp in the northeast reach, and the Northeast Reach is the name of the mining region, that these specific individuals work in. Now I'm getting to setting. I'm getting close. I'm defining who the players or characters might interact with. And I'm saying I'm getting into the specifics of who they are. I'm defining around a story. I'm starting to figure that out. And I think when you start to hit that point, set that stuff to the side. Get back to your world building. Yep. Make sure you've got a solid world.
Yep. It's always good to write plot hooks into things.
Yeah. Make a note of it.
But that's not world building.
Right.
That's where you're starting to get into storytelling now.
And this is where I separate those two, and this is the reason why, is that a lot of us who've done story writing, who've done world building, build a world for a story. And that's great. That is a great way to go, especially if you're only building one story. But sometimes that gets a little long and you don't think about it. So that a little later on, when your players are, I don't know, 7 years into your campaign that came out of nowhere, you've got giant vacant holes in your world because you weren't prepared for it. Because your world wasn't really all there, and you started doing too many things by the seat of your pants. You never went back to your world and reframed things that were proper, or wrote all the world notes that were important that you started changing because they drove off the map.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people run into trouble. We saw it in the forums when people were talking, that there are times like, hey, one of my players is this special undead race because I gave a bunch of powers. How do I dial back those powers? And you're like, well, did you ever set that up? And the answer is no. So now you have to define why that happened. And that gets hard because now you've got a framework that you weren't prepared for, and you have to remember all the rules you pre-established, all the things that you allowed. So your players and characters that are playing in your world are going to be scientists experimenting on that world. They're going to find all the little edges. They're going to find the frames. They're going to push through those. And the moment that you didn't give them a frame is the moment that you've now caused a problem.
Yep.
That they're going to push right past them and be like, well, you just told me that works this way.
Yep.
Well, it can't work that way now. Why? And that ruins their fun. They need you to they need to believe, and this is the disbelief. They need to believe that you had that shit figured out.
Yep.
You know?
It's once again the illusion of free will.
Yeah.
Is they need to think that everything you do is like you said, written down, figured out, established.
Yep.
That there are hard rules for how everything works, and when you tell them why the thing they just tried didn't work, it needs to be believable.
It's kind of,
and it needs to be consistent.
yes.
So when it doesn't work that time, it can't work later.
I mean, there's a reason why the Starship Enterprise had a giant deflector shield, because it could do everything. Mm-hmm. Did anybody really notice that it could do everything? Probably about, 7 years in, but it made sense that it did everything, that it was just a deflector shield, but somehow it was creating positronic rays and eking out tachyon pulses and it needed anything it needed to do, it could do. Yet the warp drives could only do a couple of things.
Go,
stop, and explode. That was pretty much it. And explode in terrible, terrible ways. So it was when you define your world like a starship, you need to know what are the limitations that it has.
Yep.
Everyone would recognize if there was a whole new deck that didn't exist before, and then suddenly if hey, you used to go down to deck 9 and then walk into the shuttle bay, and suddenly you're on deck 7 and able to walk into the shuttle bay. Is the shuttle bay huge? Is there a different shuttle bay?
Yeah, are there more than one shuttle bay? I mean, yeah.
Exactly. Like, where's the observation deck? Like, how do you walk to the... So these are the things that are consistent for stories. You have to keep that same consistency. So it doesn't matter if you add things to your story. You just have to make sure you keep those notes in the world section to be able to go back to. To be able to say, hey, it's easy to do with a map. You look at a map, you write in a new thing on the map, that's where they went today, this is where this person exists, make those notes and set them there.
Yep.
What's hard to say is the guy that they met there has a magical ring. And he was able to do these cool things with it. And so when your players are like, 4 years in, and they're like, wait a second, didn't Tumble have that magical ring? And they go back to see him, and he's missing, and they decide to hunt him down, and you're like, this has nothing to do with the story. You're like, but he has that magical ring, and it's the only one we've ever seen that can do those things, so I want to do those things. We're going to go kill that guy and steal his ring,
You could just ask him for it.
Exactly, but he's gone, and now you have to redefine what that means.
Yeah.
So I think that's where things get troubled, is when you're in a story and you move beyond the page. You step over the map. You have to remember all the parts, and that's a challenging thing for a storyteller to try and keep track of.
It is.
So,
all right, how do you feel about this?
Well, I feel it's a good step. I think we're going to end up with some questions besides the ones we already have.
Oh, definitely. I think I see not necessarily our near future, but I definitely see a world building part 2 episode.
Yeah,
probably coming up.
Yeah, I know next week you've got a different a different one to go to, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
We'll get there, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to do some questions?
Sure, we've got a couple good questions. Some of them are questions within questions.
We've got some great questions on here, actually. I was excited about a couple of these, yeah.
And I threw veterans in there. I know it was late, but I still threw it in there. I thought it was good.
Fine.
I thought it was a good one. So go ahead.
All right, so we're going to start at the top. The Mad Elf asks, magic, psionics, high-tech, superpowers. Do you work effectively? How do you work effectively with the fantastical elements of game systems? What are your personal favorite systems and mechanics? What do you recommend for the new storyteller and or the new player?
That's a fine question.
It's a pretty big question.
Let's start at the beginning.
Okay, so how do you work effectively with the fantastical elements of game systems? I mean, I think from a system standpoint, your game has to be balanced around them. So especially if you are creating your own world, I know like a lot of settings, like D&D is all pretty kind of packed in and stuff like that. It's got its own defined spell list and stuff like that. But if you're creating stuff from scratch, just keep in mind that every fantastical tool you give, every magic wand solution you give the players is going to be used for exactly that.
Yeah, and sometimes, realistically, there's a couple of systems that use fantastical elements perfectly fine because the game system isn't wrapped around them. It's not a combat game. So it's a game about, like, for instance, there's one that I'm trying to remember the name of that keeps eluding me, which is more of a social game because the game isn't about these teen characters. It's basically Teen Titans. Sure. Except it's what happens after you finish off an enemy. It's what happens after you come back and dealing with the social repercussions that, you're a teenager who has to go to school, or maybe you live in an orphanage, or maybe you're dealing with, personal conflict at home. Yet you have super strength. What, you're just going to tear your dad apart? You've got some psychological issues to manage there too. And that's what the game's really about. So you are literally, you feel no pain, you have super healing, and you're clairvoyant. Yet your father's a drunk and he beats you every night, and you're a superhero.
I got dark quick.
Well, again, that's the story.
Yeah.
That's what that system is. So I think that, and I'm going to be careful here. Superpowers, high tech, and magic are things that work well in any system as long as it's balanced. I am squarely against psionics.
Squarely against psionics because almost every single system they have zero consequences
and they're broken and they don't make sense and they just I've never liked it. Even like in digital games, it doesn't make any sense. I think that psionics has always been a terrible MacGuffin to throw into things because it's a reason why people, and it never works consistently.
There's probably some Trinity fans out there right now shouting at you that you're wrong.
Sure.
But I think that
there's probably some Rifts people out there shouting at me.
Yeah, that may be the only system I've ever seen do it moderately okay, and Trinity's definitely my least favorite of the game systems.
Yeah, so. But there are ways. It all comes down to system, really, I would say.
So what's your favorite? Yeah.
I like the magic systems in 7th Sea the way they did them.
Okay.
Because they're different. They're based on nation. And it comes from in the game it actually comes from the fact that those original members of those nations, the bloodlines, made blood pacts with basically demons, and that's how they got it. So they're very specific in their magics. Yep. And so you can't cross magics. It's a system based, but they're different. They're not your typical things. I think 2nd edition made some changes that I wasn't happy about with those magics, so I kind of stick to my 1st edition ones. Sure. But I thought they were cool. I thought it was a really cool system for it.
I'm going to say probably my favorite system as far as like an extra sort of power set is ritual magic. I've seen a couple systems do it well. I actually really liked, for as little of this game, remarkably, as I got to play over the years, Mage the Ascension. I think had it was a pretty elaborate system, and I think that's why I didn't get to play a lot of it because a lot of people were scared by the system.
If you like Mage the Ascension and the magic within it, Chris should run you a game. He was the one who made that seem cool. And made it work. And everybody else I've ever seen run it
Yeah.
It's kind of but he has such a mind for it, and it is cool. It's very logical.
The second game system that I actually saw do remarkably well is actually the Dresden Files role-playing game.
You've talked about that a few times.
It's run off of the Fate system, but they had a lot of rules specifically written for the Dresden Files universe. And, a lot of it basically comes with like, okay, if you want to do this thing, it comes with an astronomical target number to it. But if you're going to do it over the course of an hour rather than trying to do it off the cuff, then it lowers the target number.
Yeah.
Do you have candles? Lowers the target number. Do you have a sample of the target of the spell, like a lock of hair or something like that? Lowers the target number. And you do everything you possibly can to try to build up to that, lower that target number from a 10 to a 3.
Right.
And then it's paltry. But it makes you leverage a lot of different skills for it, a lot of different things, and really think about what it is you're trying to do. And how that spell fits into the bigger game world,
right?
And kind of about the correspondences of things and such like that.
Nice.
What color are your candles? Are they blue because you're trying to work water magic? That sort of thing.
Right. And I think for somebody new, like if we're going to talk about this from a perspective like the last part of the question, if I was recommending a storyteller, like for instance, maybe they were used to playing D&D and their group was like, hey, can we play superheroes? Like what system would I grab or what would I explain to them? I would say go for something fun and super heroic where you're not at competition with your players. Let them have fun with it.
Yeah.
Make it, honestly, grab Palladium, play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Super Spies, and just have fun with it. Go 7th and make heroes or something like that. You can do it with the turn-based system, but I think the more the system is embedded in with it, the more that it's more like a combat balance. I think you're gonna struggle as a storyteller to get to know all the rules that your players might know.
I think for new players especially, finding a place to point or a place to start with that is largely dependent upon finding that sweet spot between simple enough for a newbie to grasp and not be intimidated by, and not overly complex enough, or I should say structured enough that when they ask, what can I do with this? The answer isn't, oh, anything.
Right.
Because that's just as intimidating of an answer.
Right.
Because you need a little bit of structure. You need a starting point at least.
Yep. No, I agree with both of those.
One of the reasons I like D&D is because there is a wide variety of a wide variety of spell casters, and a wide variety of levels of spells, but each one of those spells is discreetly defined.
Yes. I think that helps a lot.
You get a lot of variety, but at the same time, you get definitive spells that all do a very simple task, in amongst themselves.
Yeah. So I would, if your players wanted something different, wanted to move away, I would say find something simple that you can work with, and make sure that you're meeting their criteria.
Yep.
For the story.
Yep.
So, Draven. Does your prep change when players begin to reach a level where they have access to things like teleport that allows them to literally go anywhere? If so, how?
It has to.
I think it has to.
It has
but at the same time, my prep would still be the same. I say that because my prep would be the same.
I mean, the process of prep would be the same, but the things I prep would be different.
I might have. Oh, I agree with that. For me, it's it's that I prepare for my players' transport. Like in my head, it's already there. So if my players can suddenly go, like in 7th, if my players can now use Fey pools and literally jump into water and end up in the Fey realm at any time.
We can do that?
There's a power set for that.
Hey.
If that's a thing, if that's going to happen, then I just prepare a scene that works within that framework, so that the moment they step off into that realm, I can put them in a scene, negotiate something, and then sidestep to go, okay, where are they going with this? Like, where do I want them to go with this?
Yep.
And again, it's also the illusion that they're going where they want to go.
Yep. I would say the only thing I can think of in how your prep changes when your travel plans expand like that is that now instead of having to prep the 2 small villages that are all within a day's travel of where they currently are, I need to prep maybe the 4 different cities that I gave them the teleport keys to.
But I also think that it's part of talking to your players.
Sure.
Like, hey, where do you guys want to go?
That's absolutely the other half.
So
of this. I'm glad you.
So
brought
if your players are shotgun players, where they're just gonna where you're like, okay, guys, welcome to the session. What are we doing today? I'm gonna say it. You're a bad DM.
Yeah.
You should have had a conversation with them the week before, saying, okay, guys, we have a story coming up next week. Are you guys going to stick around because you wasted the beholder and you've left the dungeon and you're back at the pub? What do you guys want to do? I don't know. Do you want me to give you some options next week and then we'll go from there? Or do you guys want to go after this thing? So you should be laying those things out as a storyteller.
Yeah, that's something we've definitely gotten in the habit of. I hop on our channel in Discord devoted to our game, and I say, all right, guys, let's hear some meta discussion.
Yeah.
You guys have just defeated this particular enemy. You've got this within reach, this within reach. Some of you were talking about going here. Where are you going? Yeah. And it's not so that I can foil their plans, because I know because I've read some stuff online too where they're like, I don't know if that's a good thing to discuss it with the DM, because I don't want them to be like ready for us and then like poo poo on our plans.
Right.
Well, first off, if your DM is doing that, they're a bad DM. Okay, it shouldn't be player versus DM.
You can have that style of game. I will say, and if you are an antagonistic style of storyteller, that is a style of storytelling. It's not that either one of us like. So I'm gonna say, let's not just shit on those people immediately.
That's fair. That's fair. If you are looking for a collaborative storytelling experience like what Rob and I favor,
right, then
you
should collaborate.
You should collaborate, and that means between games too.
Let's just do this. Stop, collaborate, and listen. Your players will tell you where they want to go.
Oh, goodness.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
They'll tell you where they want to go. Now, on the other hand, if you've got a power in-game where you're like, oh, shit, we're at a situation, teleport, D&D, you have to set that shit up. You have to have a distance that they can go to. There has to be, all that stuff has to be laid out in the back. If they can literally teleport anywhere, a la blue guy from The Watchmen, they're somewhere else. You don't have okay. So where do you teleport to? Middle of New York City. Boom. Okay, you're sitting in the middle of New York City. Okay, that's it. Boom. 10 minutes, the police will be here. Why? Because a guy just pulled a fire alarm 6 feet from you because you're giant and blue. So I would say if your characters are at a point where they can literally go anywhere, and you're talking about between stories, talk to them.
Yep.
If they can literally go anywhere in a story, then just be prepared that they're going to go somewhere random, and they're aware that it's somewhere random, and just set up your own rule set for that.
Now, the cool thing about teleports is typically you can only go to known locations.
That's another one.
It makes it astronomically difficult to get to places you've never been before.
But
you can pull it off, but at least you should probably have some notes about it.
Yeah. All right. You got Overwatch?
Yeah. All right. So Overwatch asks, politics, history, ecology, culture. What's your Achilles heel of world building, and what are some workarounds you've come up to get past it?
Drawing maps. Straight up. I am shitty at drawing world maps and ecology because I don't think enough about how big a scale of something is. So I end up making a continent that's that's equivocally the size of Texas.
Yeah.
But it has jungles and desert and huge mountain ranges, and I'm like, none of this makes sense to anybody who's really thinking about it. At the same time, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm worried about it. That's me.
It is arbitrary, and I definitely do struggle with that a little bit. The distances on maps, and you're like, oh, you get there in 3 days of horse travel, and you're like, oh, wow, no, actually looking at this map, that should have been like a week and a half. But it's boring to do long travel times, so...
Honestly, it shouldn't matter.
It shouldn't matter.
And maps suck.
Yeah.
But honestly, this my way around it, I steal. I find somebody else's shit that's better than mine, and I use that. And whatever.
Yeah. What I typically found was flowcharts as substitutes for maps.
Ooh.
Because the roads don't matter.
No.
The roads are literally just lines between hubs.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Flowchart.
Object to object. Yep. That's solid.
That's
solid.
That's how the map of the Highlands in my Tamriel game started off.
What's your Achilles heel?
My Achilles heel is culture.
Okay.
Culture, definitely. I've got a homebrew world that I've been toying with literally since high school, and I've written it and rewritten it and rewritten it and rewritten it, and it's always come out the most generic Tolkien, boring. Already been done in every other literal D&D game ever.
Welcome to society. It's just the shades of our own existence.
Yep. And I, for some reason, I cannot innovate beyond that. I cannot make an interesting culture that isn't, we're dwarves, we smith things.
I got our show after this one. Developing the people of the world.
Yeah, we could talk about that.
We can start hacking that apart.
It would be a learning experience for me.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. Techno.
Okay, I love this question, by the way.
How weird is too weird? Is there a point where alien nature or setting can be off-putting? What are some good tips to identify touchstones as far as ways to relate to the weird? First off, I'm going to say there is no too weird, but I do believe that there is a point where it's crossed, and that point is when your players feel uncomfortable, that they don't want to interact, or if it is not pertinent to your story that they're uncomfortable with it, then you might have gone a little too far.
Yeah, I'll say that. That's a great answer. What I'll add is the words suspension of disbelief.
I agree.
So when you are sitting there, and describing all these scenes, the entire scene is taking place, the entire world is taking place in your imagination.
Yes.
Okay. The more stuff you hand them that they have to imagine that is not second nature to them, okay? The sky is no longer blue.
Right.
The grass is no longer green. Gravity no longer pulls down.
Right.
These sort of things are going to stretch their imagination.
Yes.
At a certain point, too weird gets when it goes beyond their ability to logically imagine it and suspend their disbelief enough to be there.
Right.
And at that point, I think that's when people start becoming uncomfortable, when people start going, okay, this is just damn ridiculous.
Yeah.
At that point, I would say it's definitely too weird. But yeah, I would say limit the suspension of disbelief. And this is kind of where your logical consistencies come in. The more you can define why that island is floating, the less they'll worry about it.
Yeah.
And the less suspension of disbelief there'll need to be, simply because islands float here. That's what lodestone does to them.
Right. Like, if you define the fact that there is a type of magic that can animate anything, anything. It'll animate a box, it'll animate a chair, it'll animate a candle. And by animate, I mean various levels, from it is non-sentient and it just wiggles around like grass, all the way out to it's a singing sword.
Yeah.
And it has an intelligence, and it can tell you stories, and it lives forever. Like, great. You now know about that. You've defined it. People are aware of it. And so suddenly, skeletons don't seem so weird. You know?
Yeah.
A mimic, a chest that suddenly wants to eat you and put you inside of it does not seem weird. Because you're defining what that thing does.
Yep.
And continues to want to do.
Yep.
So, yeah.
All right, last question. We gotta go quick.
When building worlds, how beneficial do you find unique versions of the core world items? Currency, hours in the day, months in the year. Do you find the added flavor is worth the learning curve for your players? In all honesty, I've always found currency to be challenging no matter what the system is.
Yeah,
I think it's cool, but at the same time, like, if I have to explain to my players over and over again that this country uses different currency than this country and the conversion rates are these things, I usually don't.
Yeah.
So, and hours in the day changing or the months in the year, unless it's relevant.
Yeah.
I think it's good flavor in the exposition before and after a story. Like you do?
Yeah,
but other than that, I really don't care.
I always give the date in Tamrielic calendar, but even the Tamrielic calendar is just a reskin of our existing calendar. You know, we're the Tirdos, the 6th day of mid-year. It's just Tuesday, the 6th of June. Like, straight up, you know.
So,
unless it's relevant. I don't know.
All right. So next week's topic, you're with Matt.
Yeah, we're gonna have a special guest, Matthew. You all know him as the Mad Elf in our Discord server, and we are going to be talking a little bit about challenging emotional situations at the table and kind of how to work through those and deal with them and stuff like that.
I wish you luck. I'll be throwing some questions your way.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to them. All right, so let's wrap up for the evening. You can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave. We are also on Instagram, also ST_conclave. And on Discord, you can find the link. It's the pinned tweet on Twitter. You can also find that in the show note descriptions of any of our podcasts on the major networks.
We'd love to hear you on our Discord, asking questions and working through the stuff that our players do. We'd also like to thank our Patreon members, specifically Knox in a Box. Thank you so much. And the rest of our members who help support us. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Gooey Frog. And our outro music is Only the Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine, both at freemusicarchive.org. We record here at Podcast Detroit, and that's at podcastdetroit.com or at Podcast Detroit on Twitter. Jessica is our engineer tonight. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And we'd like to thank our families, Vicky, Sean, and all of our friends who keep this going and keep us learning every time we get on one of these shows.
And to all of our listeners, thank you. We love you, and good night.